I never imagined that my brother's wedding would be the day I'd finally understand what my father had stolen from me. The champagne tasted like ash in my mouth as I stood at the edge of the reception hall, watching Marcus, golden, beloved Marcus, dance with his new bride under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was celebrating. And I was the only one who knew that everything we'd built our lives on was a lie. My name is Elena Hartwell, and this is the story of how I discovered that family isn't always bound by love, sometimes it's bound by secrets so dark they can suffocate you. It started 3 months earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday that would fracture my world into before and after. I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn, staring at rejection letters from art galleries that had once shown interest in my work, when my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach clench, Victoria Hartwell. My mother never called unless something was wrong or she needed something, and lately, those two things had become synonymous. "Elena, darling, I need you to come home this weekend," she said, her voice carrying that particular melody of command disguised as request that she'd perfected over decades of high society maneuvering. "Mom, I have a showing lined up," I began, but she cut me off. "Your brother is getting married. To Charlotte Pemberton. The announcement will be in the Times next week, and we're having an engagement party. Your presence is not optional," she said. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Charlotte Pemberton. Daughter of the Pemberton Hotel empire. The girl Marcus had sworn he'd never marry because she represented everything we'd once rebelled against: old money, old traditions, old lies. "I'll be there," I said, my voice flat. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, remembering the brother Marcus used to be. The one who'd sneak into my room when we were teenagers, bringing stolen art supplies from Dad's study. The one who'd promised that when he took over Hartwell Industries, he'd make sure I got my fair share, that Dad's favoritism towards sons wouldn't define our futures. The one who'd held me when I cried after Dad told me that art was a hobby, not a career, and that my inheritance would be managed appropriately when the time came. That Marcus had disappeared slowly over the years, replaced by someone who fit perfectly into the mold our father had cast for him. The drive to Connecticut that weekend felt like traveling backward through time. Every mile brought me closer to the sprawling estate where I'd grown up feeling like a ghost in my own home, seen but never quite visible, present but never quite there. The Hartwell mansion sat on 40 acres of manicured perfection, all white columns and old-world grandeur, a monument to my great-grandfather's steel fortune and my father's ruthless expansion of the family empire. Marcus met me at the door, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy he'd been. Then Charlotte appeared behind him, and his face transformed into something harder, more polished. "Elena!" "God, it's been too long," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt performative. "6 months," I replied. "Since Dad's birthday." Charlotte extended a perfectly manicured hand, her smile bright and empty. "I've heard so much about you. Marcus says you're an artist." The way she said artist made it sound like a cute affliction, something charming but ultimately meaningless. "I paint," I said simply. The engagement party was exactly what I'd expected, a parade of Connecticut's finest, all air-kissing and networking, treating love like another business transaction to be celebrated with expensive champagne and hollow congratulations. I stood near the windows overlooking the gardens where Marcus and I used to hide from our parents fighting, and I felt like I was drowning in nostalgia and resentment in equal measure. That's when I saw him. Dad was in his study, I could see him through the French doors, and he wasn't alone. He was with James Pemberton, Charlotte's father, and they were toasting each other with whiskey, their expressions satisfied in a way that made my skin crawl. I watched as Dad pulled out a folder from his desk drawer, the same drawer where he kept documents he didn't want anyone else to see. I'd learned that at 13 when I'd found my mother's prenuptial agreement hidden there, the one that gave her almost nothing if she ever left him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I watched Dad slide the folder across the desk to Pemberton, who opened it and smiled, a predator's smile, sharp and satisfied. Something in my gut twisted. After the party wound down, after Charlotte and her family had left in their town car, after the caterers had cleaned up and the lights had dimmed, I did something I hadn't done in years. I broke into my father's study. The lock was the same one from my childhood, and I still remembered the trick, a hairpin and patience. The folder was exactly where I'd seen him put it, and when I opened it, my hands started shaking. It was a contract. A merger agreement between Hartwell Industries and Pemberton Hotels, dated for completion 30 days after Marcus and Charlotte's wedding. But that wasn't what made my heart stop. Attached to it was another document, a revised will. My father's will. I read it 3 times before the words fully penetrated. Everything, the company, the properties, the investments, all of it, was going to Marcus. Not split between us. Not divided according to contribution or need. All of it. To Marcus. And in exchange for this marriage, for this merger, Pemberton had agreed to inject $50 million into Hartwell Industries, saving it from what the documents described as critical financial difficulties. My father was selling my brother for money to save a company I'd never be allowed to inherit. And there was more. A letter, paperclipped to the will, in my father's handwriting. I shouldn't have read it. I wish I hadn't. But I did. Marcus, it began, by the time you read this, you'll understand why certain decisions had to be made. Your sister was never suited for leadership. Her artistic pursuits, while charming, demonstrate a fundamental lack of the ruthlessness required to maintain our position. I've structured everything to ensure the Hartwell legacy continues through you. Elena will receive a monthly allowance that will keep her comfortable but dependent. This is for her own good. She lacks your strength, your vision, your worthiness. You are my true heir. Everything I've built is yours to command. I stood in that study, holding evidence of my father's contempt, and something inside me cracked open. Not just hurt, I'd been hurt before. This was colder, sharper. This was clarity. They'd been planning this. Dad and Marcus. Maybe not explicitly, maybe not in words, but Marcus had known. He must have known. All those promises about equality, about changing things when he took over, about protecting me from Dad's favoritism, all lies. Because if he'd loved me, if he'd valued me, he would have questioned this. He would have fought this. Instead, he was marrying Charlotte Pemberton in 3 months, and I would become an afterthought with a monthly stipend, dependent on my brother's generosity for the rest of my life. I took photos of everything with my phone. Every page, every clause, every word of my father's letter. Then I put it all back exactly as I'd found it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling where I'd once taped glow-in-the-dark stars, and I planned. Revenge isn't about anger, I realized. It's about precision. It's about understanding what someone values most and taking it away so completely they can never get it back. My father valued legacy and control. Marcus valued approval and the golden path laid out before him. Charlotte valued status and the merger of 2 powerful families. I would destroy all of it. The first phase was research. I spent the next month living 2 lives. Publicly, I was the supportive sister, attending wedding planning sessions, smiling through dress fittings, playing my part in the Hartwell family theater. Privately, I was investigating. I hired a forensic accountant, discreetly, paying in cash, to look into Hartwell Industries' finances. What he found was staggering. My father hadn't just made bad investments. He'd been cooking the books for years, hiding losses, inflating asset values, using company money to fund his lifestyle while claiming poverty to avoid splitting anything with my mother when she'd threatened divorce a decade ago. The company wasn't just struggling, it was a hollowed-out shell, weeks away from bankruptcy. The Pemberton merger wasn't a business opportunity. It was a lifeboat. But there was something else. Something the accountant found buried in offshore accounts and shell corporations. My father had been siphoning money from my trust fund, the one my grandfather had set up for me before he died. 20 years of systematic theft, justified in internal memos as reallocation of family resources for optimal growth. He'd stolen nearly $8 million from me, and he'd done it so cleverly that I'd never even known the fund existed. My grandfather, the man I barely remembered but whom my father had always spoken of with grudging respect, had tried to protect me. And my father had betrayed him, just as he'd betrayed me. I sat with this knowledge for 3 days, feeling it burn through me like acid. Then I made a decision. I reached out to someone I'd never thought I'd contact, my Uncle Richard, my father's younger brother. They'd been estranged for 15 years, ever since Richard had accused my father of forcing him out of the family business through fraud and intimidation. At the time, my father had painted Richard as jealous, unstable, a troublemaker. Now I wondered if Richard had simply been telling the truth. We met at a coffee shop in New Haven, far enough from the Hartwell sphere of influence that we wouldn't be seen. Richard was older than I remembered, gray threading through his dark hair, but his eyes were sharp and sad. "I wondered if you'd ever reach out," he said after I'd told him everything. "Your father is a brilliant man, Elena. Brilliant and absolutely without conscience. I spent years trying to prove what he did to me, but he'd covered his tracks too well. I have evidence now," I said, sliding my phone across the table. "Everything." He looked through the photos for a long time, his expression growing harder with each swipe. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "Your grandfather would be heartbroken," he said quietly. "He loved you so much. He set up that trust because he knew what your father was. He tried to protect you." "Help me," I said. "Help me make this right." Richard smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Gladly." The second phase was more delicate. I needed to split the alliance between the Hartwell and Pemberton families, but I couldn't do it obviously. It had to look natural, inevitable, like the relationship was simply doomed from the start. I started with Charlotte. I befriended her, slowly and carefully. Shopping trips, lunch dates, long conversations about wedding planning. I became her confidant, the sister she'd never had. And she, desperate for authenticity in a life built on appearances, opened up to me. She admitted she didn't love Marcus. She liked him well enough, found him handsome and charming, but love? No. This was a family arrangement, and she was doing her duty. What she really wanted, she confessed over wine one evening, was to open her own boutique hotel, something small and artistic and entirely her own creation. But her father would never allow it, not when there was a Hartwell merger to secure. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not even real," she told me, her voice small. "Like I'm just playing a part in someone else's story." I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for her. She was as much a pawn as I had been. "What if you didn't have to marry him?" I asked carefully. She laughed, but it was bitter. "And do what?" "My trust fund is contingent on making an appropriate marriage. My father made sure of that. If I don't marry Marcus, I get nothing. I'd be starting over from zero, and I'm 28 years old with no work experience and a degree in art history. I'd be lost." An idea crystallized in my mind, sharp and perfect. "What if you weren't starting from zero?" I said. "What if someone believed in your hotel dream enough to invest in it?" She looked at me with hope and suspicion warring in her eyes. "Who would do that?" "Let me worry about that," I said. "But Charlotte, if you had a way out, would you take it?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, yes. God, yes. I didn't tell her about my own money, about the trust fund my father had stolen and that Richard and I were working with lawyers to recover. I didn't tell her that I saw in her an opportunity not just for revenge, but for something stranger, a kind of justice that might actually help someone. Instead, I planted seeds. I introduced her to my artist friends in Brooklyn, the ones building real careers on passion and determination. I showed her what life could look like outside the golden cage. And I watched her start to question everything she'd accepted as inevitable. Meanwhile, Richard and I were building our legal case. The forensic accountant had found enough evidence of fraud to potentially bring criminal charges against my father. But we didn't want prison time, not yet. We wanted something more surgical. We wanted to destroy the merger. 6 weeks before the wedding, we struck. Richard filed a civil lawsuit against my father, claiming fraud and demanding an audit of Hartwell Industries' finances. The filing was public record, and within hours, the story hit the business pages. Hartwell Brothers feud erupts in lawsuit. I watched my father's face go pale when he saw the news. I was having breakfast with the family when his assistant rushed in with a tablet, and the transformation was instantaneous, from composed patriarch to cornered animal in a heartbeat. "That bastard," he hissed. "That jealous, pathetic bastard." Marcus looked worried. "Dad, what's this about?" "What fraud?" "Nothing. Lies. Ancient grievances." But my father's voice was shaking. James Pemberton called an hour later. I could hear my father's side of the conversation from where I sat in the next room, pretending to read a magazine. "James, this is a nuisance suit, nothing more." "No, our finances are solid." "I understand your concern, but..." "James, our families have an agreement." "Yes, of course we can provide additional documentation, but..." "I see. Yes. We'll discuss it." When he hung up, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. "They want to see everything," he said to my mother, who'd appeared in the doorway. "Full financial disclosure before they'll proceed with the merger." "Can you provide it?" she asked, and there was something in her voice I'd never heard before, doubt. "Of course," he said, but we both knew he was lying. The third twist came from a direction I hadn't anticipated. 3 weeks before the wedding, Charlotte came to me in tears. We were supposed to be finalizing seating charts, but she was shaking, her perfect makeup ruined by crying. "Elena, I need to tell you something," she said. "I've been keeping a secret, and I can't anymore." My heart started pounding. "What is it?" "I'm seeing someone. Have been for months. Before Marcus, before any of this." She took a shuddering breath. "His name is Daniel, and he's a chef, and I love him. Really love him. But my father found out, and he threatened to destroy Daniel's career, get him blacklisted from every restaurant in the Northeast, if I didn't end it. So I did. I broke up with him and agreed to marry Marcus, and I've been dying inside ever since." I stared at her, recalculating everything. "Charlotte, why are you telling me this now?" "Because you asked me if I'd take a way out if someone gave me one. And I've been thinking about what that would mean, what I'd be walking away from and what I'd be walking toward. And I realized I can't marry Marcus. I can't do this to him, or to Daniel, or to myself. But I'm terrified." I took her hands in mine. "What if I told you that the merger is falling apart anyway? That within a week, maybe 2, your father is going to back out because Hartwell Industries is basically bankrupt?" Her eyes widened. "What?" "My father has been lying to everyone, including your family. The company is bleeding money. My uncle's lawsuit is going to expose everything. Your father isn't going to want to tie himself to a sinking ship." She processed this, her expression shifting from shock to something like relief. "So if I walk away from Marcus now, you're just accelerating what's already inevitable. And you might even be protecting your family from a bad deal." She laughed, short and sharp. "Oh my God. Oh my God, this is insane." "Charlotte, I can help you. I'm coming into money, family money that should have been mine all along. Enough to back your boutique hotel dream. But only if you do this now, before the wedding, and you do it publicly enough that everyone knows this wasn't Marcus's choice." "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me? Marcus is your brother." "Because Marcus knew," I said, and my voice went cold. "He knew what our father was doing to me, and he said nothing. He let me believe we were equals, that he'd protect me, and all along he was planning to take everything. So yes, I'm helping you. But I'm also destroying him." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw her truly understand who I was for the first time. Not the accommodating sister, not the artistic dreamer. Someone with edges sharp enough to cut. "Okay," she said. "What do we do?" I looked into her eyes, as if she were measuring the weight of my silence. With every passing second, the air in the room grew heavier, our unease pressing in from all sides. The choice was far from simple, yet there was no escaping it. And then the moment arrived, the rehearsal dinner, an evening that would change everything. It was meant to be a quiet, intimate gathering, just family and the wedding party. When Charlotte rose during the toasts, her champagne glass still untouched, her voice carried steady and clear, cutting through the room with a force that none of us could ignore. "I'm sorry," she said, "but I can't do this." The room went silent. "Marcus, you're a good man, but I don't love you. I've been lying to myself and to you, and I can't stand here and make promises I know I won't keep. I'm calling off the wedding." Marcus stood up, his face flushing. "Charlotte, what are you talking about? We can discuss this privately." "No," she said firmly. "I've been doing things privately, hiding how I really feel, and it's made me miserable. I won't marry you. I'm sorry for the embarrassment, for the inconvenience, but this ends now." She set down her glass and walked out. The aftermath was chaos. James Pemberton stormed out, his wife following. My father looked like he might have a stroke. My mother just sat there, expression unreadable. And Marcus turned to me, his eyes searching my face. "You knew," he said. "Didn't you?" "I knew a lot of things," I replied quietly. "Like how you were planning to take everything and leave me with nothing. Like how Dad stole from my trust fund. Like how this whole merger was built on fraud and lies." "Elena," he started, but I cut him off. "Don't. Just don't." I walked out, and I didn't look back. The final phase unfolded over the next 2 weeks like dominoes falling in slow motion. The forensic audit Richard had demanded revealed everything, the cooked books, the offshore accounts, the systematic theft from my trust fund. James Pemberton pulled out of the merger completely and threatened legal action. My father's board of directors forced him to resign. Hartwell Industries declared bankruptcy. Marcus called me once during all of this. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short: "Elena, please. We need to talk." I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the full extent of what Dad was doing. But he'd known enough. He'd known about the will. He'd known I was being written out. And he'd said nothing. I didn't call him back. The money from my trust fund, once recovered, was substantial. My grandfather had been more generous than I'd imagined. I used part of it to back Charlotte's boutique hotel, the Pemberton, she called it, a small act of defiance against her father's empire. I used the rest to open my own gallery in Brooklyn, showing emerging artists who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't commercial enough, weren't the right fit for the established art world. I named it Hartwell Gallery, reclaiming the name for something Dad would have hated. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, my father died of a heart attack. I went to the funeral because my mother asked me to, but I felt nothing standing over his casket. No grief, no satisfaction, nothing. He'd become irrelevant to my life, and that was a kind of revenge he'd never anticipated, not destruction, but erasure. Marcus tried to speak to me at the funeral. "Elena, I know you hate me, but..." "I don't hate you," I interrupted. "Hate requires caring. I just don't think about you at all anymore." His face crumpled, and I realized that was worse for him than anything else I could have said. Marcus had always needed to be central to every story, every room, every life. Being irrelevant to me was a fate he'd never imagined. I walked away from him for the last time, and it felt like shedding weight I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it was there. My mother and I developed an unexpected relationship in the aftermath. Over tea in her newly downsized apartment, the estate had been sold to pay debts, she finally spoke honestly to me. I knew, she said quietly. Not everything, but enough. I knew your father favored Marcus. I knew he was planning to give him everything. And I said nothing because I was afraid of being left with nothing, afraid of losing what little power I had. I know, I said. I've known for a while. Can you forgive me? She asked, and there were tears in her eyes. I don't know, I said honestly. But we can start over. Not as the family we were, but as something new. Something honest. She nodded, relief and sadness mixing on her face. I'd like that. Charlotte's Hotel opened in the spring, a small gem in the Berkshires that got rave reviews for its intimacy and artistry. She invited me to the opening, and I went. Daniel was there, his arm around her waist, both of them glowing with a happiness that looked nothing like the performance Charlotte had been preparing for with Marcus. Thank you, she told me, squeezing my hand. For believing I could do this. For helping me find the courage. You did the hard part, I said. You walked away from the safe choice. So did you, she replied, smiling. And look at us now. I thought about that a lot in the months that followed, as my gallery grew and my own art began to sell, the work I'd created during those dark months of planning, pieces that dealt with inheritance and betrayal and the price of family loyalty. Critics called them raw, unflinching, necessary. I called them cathartic. Uncle Richard came to my gallery opening, proud and emotional. Your grandfather would have loved this, he told me. Not just the success, but the fact that you built it yourself, on your own terms. We built it, I corrected. You helped me get my life back. You helped me get justice, he countered. We helped each other. And that, I realized, was what family should have been all along, not hierarchy and control, but mutual support and honest reckoning. I saw Marcus once more, a year after everything had imploded. It was accidental, we were at the same restaurant in Manhattan, and he was with a woman I didn't recognize. He looked older, tired, less golden. When our eyes met across the room, I saw something in his face that might have been regret or might have been just the reflection of his own losses. He started to stand, perhaps to approach me, but I shook my head slightly. Not in anger, not in rejection, just in closure. We had nothing to say to each other anymore. The brother I'd loved had been a fiction, and the man he'd become was a stranger. I turned back to my friends, to the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal, and I didn't look at him again. The lesson I learned wasn't about revenge, though that's what started this journey. It was about worth, understanding your own and refusing to let anyone diminish it. My father had tried to make me believe I was less than Marcus, less than worthy, less than real. But he was wrong. I was exactly who I'd always been, someone who could see clearly, act decisively, and build something beautiful from the ruins of what should have destroyed me. Late at night sometimes, I think about the girl I was before that Tuesday phone call, before I broke into my father's study, before I saw the truth written out in legal documents and cold calculations. Part of me misses her innocence, the way she still believed in family the way it was supposed to be. But mostly I'm grateful to her for being strong enough to survive what came next, for having the courage to burn down the lies even when she knew she'd be standing in the flames. My gallery has a piece hanging in the main room that people always ask about. It's a painting of a house on fire, but the flames are made of gold leaf, and if you look closely, you can see a figure walking away from the burning structure, heading toward a horizon bright with possibility. I call it the inheritance. Because that's what I got in the end, though not in the way anyone expected. Not money or property or the Hartwell name, though I reclaimed that too, on my own terms. The real inheritance was understanding that sometimes the people who should love you most are incapable of it, and that your greatest act of rebellion is refusing to become them. The fire I set wasn't literal, but it burned just as bright, just as hot, consuming the lies and the cruelty and the carefully constructed facades. And from those ashes, I built a life that was entirely, authentically mine. That's what they could never take from me, no matter how hard they tried, the knowledge that I was never the problem, that my art and my dreams and my worth were never the things that needed fixing. They were. And in the end, they destroyed themselves, while I simply walked away and built something better. Sometimes, revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you, it's about becoming so completely yourself that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant, their power over you evaporates, and their version of you dies while you thrive. That's the revenge that lasts, the kind that doesn't just wound but transforms. The kind that takes the weapons they used against you and turns them into tools for your own liberation. I learned that the hard way, in my father's study, holding evidence of his contempt. But I'm grateful for that night, for that moment of clarity that shattered everything I'd believed. Because it gave me permission to stop being the daughter they wanted and start being the woman I was meant to be. And she was magnificent. The moral isn't complicated, betrayal teaches you who people really are, and once you know, you have a choice: remain in the story they've written for you, or write your own ending. I chose the ending where I win, not by destroying them, but by making them irrelevant to my happiness. The hardest part wasn't the revenge, it was realizing I'd been seeking approval from people who were never going to give it, trying to earn love from that incapable of offering it freely. The day I stopped trying was the day I became free. And freedom, I discovered, tastes nothing like champagne at a wedding I'll never attend. It tastes like truth, sharp and clean and wholly mine. I never looked back at the family I left behind, at the mansion that was sold, at the empire that crumbled. Because I was too busy building my own.